advertising at KBLA1580.com. That's advertising at KBLA1580.com. KBLA 1580. We've got you black.
One day, when the glory comes, it will be ours. It will be ours. Oh, one day, when the war is won, we will be sure. We will be sure. Oh, glory, glory, glory. Oh, glory, glory.
Hands to the heavens, no man, no weapon formed against, yes, glory is destined. Everyday women and men become legends. Sins that go against our skin become blessings.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm so grateful to welcome into the space the author of more than 30 books, 100 scholarly articles and reviews. He holds the Moores Professorship of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. Dr. Gerald Horne, good morning.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for all you have done on street science, on Front Page, and now on First Things First. You have just been a rock for me and for the community in terms of sharing your knowledge and the information that you hold. And, you know, it's just in this Mercury retrograde mode. I was just reflecting on that. I'm very grateful. I thank you for just years and years of microphone mileage here.
Well, my pleasure.
So, as an historian, of course, today is a day of infamy. You know, the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We know about it. We talk about it. We commemorate it. But I don't know. I mean, you know, looking back at some documentaries and different things, I don't know if people really understand the impact that had on Black America in particular and America in general, the assassination of Dr. King in terms of its political, emotional, social repercussions.
Well, all one has to do is think about the fact that after Dr. King was assassinated, scores of United States cities went up in flames, including Washington, D.C., where the flames leaped dangerously to the White House itself. We also know, per the congressional investigation led by the late Congressman Stokes of the Black Caucus of Cleveland, that Dr. King was assassinated likely as a result of a conspiracy. Certainly, that is the view of the King family. And I think that the King assassination has had so much resonance to this very day because, as we know, Dr. King appealed to virtually every segment of the Black community, every ideological segment of the Black community. Certainly, the liberals and centrists were a devotee of Dr. King, but even those to the left of liberalism were fans of Dr. King because of his anti-war stance on the war in Vietnam and war in general. And I think that that's probably one of the reasons why there was conspiracy to eliminate him, because unlike many of our leaders today, he was bold and audacious enough to look beyond the shores of the United States of America. And that is something that we desperately need nowadays.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Tavis Smiley has a book about MLK. He's the person he calls the best human that has ever been produced by this country, called The Death of a King. And he really focuses in on how in the last year of Dr. King's life, he wasn't as popular because of his stance against the war and being sort of labeled as a communist by the FBI and being disparaged. But you're saying that popularity still, I mean, obviously the response seems to tell a different story. Do you think his murder changed that conversation?
No, I think that the passage of time has allowed for more sober reflection. Certainly at the time of his assassination, let us say as of April 3rd, 1968, he was not very popular amongst the U.S. ruling elite. He was not necessarily popular amongst those who support the U.S. ruling elite. In fact, there was even dissent in the black community. Recall that the NAACP leadership was quite critical of his anti-war stance. But I think as time passed, as reflected in the point that there is a King holiday after all, which had to be voted upon by members of Congress, of course, all of whom are not necessarily of African origin, and that bespeaks the popularity that Dr. King accumulated certainly after he passed away.
Do you feel like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. became more progressive, more radical over the course of his life? Or do you think that we, because of the holiday and the whitewashing or the respectability washing of Black history, that we just don't learn about the radical King?
It's probably a combination. I think that with regard to the former point, keep in mind that one of Dr. King's closest aides was Jack Odell, who passed away a few years ago at the age of 96, who was a man of the radical left, had been a member of the Communist Party. In fact, recall that JFK, President Kennedy, took Dr. King into the Rose Garden to escape the surveillance of FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover in order to prod Dr. King to get rid of Jack. But of course, he kept up, that is to say, Dr. King kept up a sort of subterranean relationship with Jack Odell, which then led to the FBI calling him a notorious liar, etc. And when Jack came on board, which is well after the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955, 1956, I think that helped to push Dr. King along a path to the left, culminating with his 1967 speech at Riverside Church decrying the genocidal war in Indochina, which was a turning point in his life and in his politics.
Yeah. When you reference the thought that many have that Dr. King's assassination was a conspiracy, and that his family, despite assurances to the contrary, his family is still not satisfied with the official story. As an historian, where do you fall in this, or what's your analysis of that?
I wholeheartedly endorse the conclusion of Congressman Stokes and his congressional committee. Recall that they also investigated the assassination of President Kennedy and came to a similar conclusion. We also know that when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated in April 1865, that was a conspiracy. It was not just one man, John Wilkes Booth, who pulled the trigger. He had a small army behind him, literally and figuratively. We need to recognize that there are malign and malignant forces in the body politic of the United States of America who strive to get rid, in particular, of any who do not toe the conservative line, and certainly Black folk who are audacious enough to critique U.S. foreign policy and get widespread support as a result are definitely in the crosshairs.
Against the backdrop of what you said, how do you process the fact that so many on the right, those very same conservative forces that you're referring to, now co-opt the words and image of Dr. Martin Luther King to justify everything from ending affirmative action to outlawing DEI?
Well, we can expect no less. And speaking of outlawing DEI, this has really gotten out of control. Recall that as we speak, the Texas Attorney General, Ken Paxton, is investigating Boeing Airlines. Recall the episodes of doors flying off airplanes in mid-flight and all the rest. He's suggesting that DEI is responsible somehow. I don't know how he's going to come to that conclusion. You have the leading conservative spokesperson, Charlie Kirk of Turning Point USA, who says that when he gets on a plane and sees a black pilot, he gets nervous because of DEI. He feels that they're incompetent, but are put there because of DEI. Recall that when you had the accident in Baltimore, the mayor and the accident and the tragedy was blamed on DEI. So we're in some sort of bizarro world where black people are the scapegoats. And this is an outgrowth, in a sense, of the twisting of Dr. King's words about the content of your character being the major judge of your value, not more than the color of your skin. And of course, that's been perverted by the right wing into a kind of attack on affirmative action, an attack on DEI, and really trying to turn back the clock, which I'm afraid to say, as of now, is succeeding.
Yeah, I'm talking with Dr. Gerald Horne. Of course, anyone who flies a plane has to have a pilot's license. They have to go through the same hours of training. They don't just pick you out and say, hey, you're black, fly this plane. I mean, hopefully we all know that, but that is absolutely the world we're in right now. And if anyone is getting unfair, promotions, it's white folks who are, able to fail their way up the ranks to President of the United States through wealth and white privilege. We're talking with Dr. Gerald Horne, and you're welcome to call 800-920-1580. Of course, today, April 4th, the anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was assassinated on this day in 1968. It's KBLA Talk 1580.
She's reclaiming her time on KBLA Talk 1580. More First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
We must understand the politics of our community, and we must know what politics is supposed to produce.
This election year, KBLA Talk 1580 is the place for politics, unapologetically progressive politics. And we've got two of the best and brightest to help you cut through all the noise. Weekdays at 1 p.m., it's A More Perfect Union with Dr. Nicolai Corte. And at 4 p.m., it's Areva Martin in Real Time. He's the university professor and distinguished member of the White House Correspondents Association. She's a best-selling author and Harvard-trained civil rights lawyer. And they are both here every day to help guide you through all the this year, because it's going to get deep. Get your politics on weekday afternoons at 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. with A More Perfect Union, hosted by Dr. Nicolai Corte and Areva Martin in Real Time, only on KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your flag.
I'm going out with the girls this weekend. Nails done, outfit stunner, and my skin, I know it's going to be glowing because I glammed up my shower routine with new Olay Indulgent Moisture Body Wash. It smells so luxurious and moisturizes deep into my skin with its super rich, creamy lather that's bursting with vitamin B3. So my skin glows and my confidence grows. Try new Olay Indulgent Moisture Body Wash for glowing skin in just 14 days.
The thing no one tells you about periods is that your flow changes every day, and so should your tampon size. Tampax has 5 absorbencies to match your changing flow. If it hurts to remove, go down a size. If it leaks, go up a size. Only Tampax has a leak guard braid to help give you up to 100% leak and odor-free protection. All-day comfort and protection for under $5 a month. Based on average U.S. consumer usage at manufacturer suggested price. However, pricing is at the sole discretion of the retailer. Excludes 8-count.
Without the ones like you who work tirelessly to keep things running, everything would suddenly stop. Hospitals, factories, schools, and power plants, they all depend on you. No matter the weather, emergency, or time of day, you're the ones who get it done. At Grainger, we're here for you with professional-grade industrial supplies. Count on real-time product availability and fast delivery. Call, clickgrainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
When you use Bounce dryer sheets and your clothes look amazing, it's the sheet. Less static in your life? Yeah, it's the sheet. Smelling fresher than ever? It's the sheet. oh so soft fabric. Ooh la la, it's the sheet. Less wrinkles on your clothes, you know it's the sheet. Bounce dryer sheets, more freshness, more softness, less static, less wrinkles. It's the sheet.
The conversation continues right now with Dominique DiPrima on First Things First.
He's a YouTube star. He is an author and frequent radio contributor, an official contributor to KBLA Talk 1580, Dr. Gerald Horne. And I'm so appreciative of, putting things in context on this day, the day that will live in infamy as the assassination day of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. When you look at it, beyond the reaction of black folks rioting or protesting, uprising, black celebs being enlisted to try to calm us down, how do you think this impacted the larger political landscape of American politics?
Well, I think that's more complicated. I mean, certainly we have received very disturbing reports about celebrations in certain demented circles of the United States of America after the assassination of Dr. King. There were those who thought that this was a step forward, believe it or not. But I think that amongst the global population, particularly the population in Africa, there was similar sadness about this tragedy. In fact, we probably need a bit more research on that subject. I don't know of anyone who's written about that subject indeed, and it wouldn't not be that difficult to accumulate the evidence. So in sum and in substance, I would say that there was a complicated, complex reaction to the assassination of Dr. King, with some crazed souls celebrating, but the world's majority mourning.
But in the aftermath, do you think it shifted the trajectory of, presidential politics or policy, or even, our movement for black liberation?
Oh, I think it was a step backwards, no doubt. I think that it was like slapping the movement in the temple, and it left us disoriented and dazed. It softened us up to be pushed further back. There's no doubt that this was a regressive step, and I think that the conspirators realized that they recognized that decapitating the body would leave the body disoriented.
Yeah. I mean, we always hear a lot about, how our movement is not a person, it's a movement. And there are so many people that worked, for example, on the March on Washington or any other huge moment or achievement in civil rights, black liberation. It's always a collective effort. But still, it's undeniable. I wonder, it's just like these certain crossroads, flashpoints in history where you think, what would have happened? How different would America have been had Dr. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X been able to live out their lives?
Well, sure. I mean, I think we recognize, as you have well articulated, that we have a movement. We have a body of individuals with their shoulder at the wheel. But at the same time, you cannot ignore the importance of the individual in terms of making history. It would be as if, I hate to put this negative vibe out there, if Melina Abdullah were to be removed from the scene with regard to Black Lives Matter LA, that is an organization, but certainly it would be disorienting, it would be destabilizing, it would be a great leap backwards.
Yeah. I like the better example of what would happen to the MAGA movement should its leader find himself, having one too many cheeseburgers. But your point is taken. And that what we were talking about, the co-opting and now this sort of, I guess, controversial article that Nicole Hannah Jones wrote in in the LA Times, the New York Times, about the colorblind sort of erasure of Black progress using that colorblind model. It's so weird to me that these are the same folks that are arguing that we're in a post-racial society, are the same people that are saying they don't want to fly on a plane if there's a Black person there because they're there because of DEI. How can both of those things be true?
Well, I have in my hand, as we speak, an article in the leading journal of U.S. history, the American Historical Review. And the subtitle of the article is "The Far Right Takes Aim at Black History." It looks at the backlash against Nicole Hannah-Jones, against their 1619 project, the attempt to ban it, to outlaw, book bannings, high school K-12 teachers being fired by talking about slavery in an authentic fashion, the efforts in the state of Florida to suggest that there were enslaved Africans who learned skills, believe it or not, in slavery, trying to suggest that even slavery was a step forward for Black people. There is an all-out assault right now. And you can almost draw a straight line from April 4th, 1968, when our leader was murdered, to this present declension, this present great leap backwards that we are now enduring.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. It's in this context, as an historian, right, you have studied the ebb and flow. There's always going to be expansion, contraction. Every year is not going to be 2020 where we're all out in the streets. And we see progress, backlash. My dad used to talk about feeling like Sisyphus rolling the rock up the hill, then it rolls back down on you. Are you suggesting that even in the broad view that you have as an historian, this moment is not part of the regular ebb and flow of, right, left, Republican, Democrat, conservative progress?
It's hard to say, to be honest with you. For example, if you look at this upcoming election, November 2024, the Wall Street Journal just yesterday had a front page article suggesting that in 7 battleground states, Mr. Trump is comfortably ahead. At the same time, yesterday in the New York Times, there was a dialogue with Simon Rosenberg, a well-known pollster for the Democratic Party side, and he suggested that since 2016, the Republicans have suffered setbacks in 2018, 2020, 2022, and that inevitably will occur in 2024. Now, that kind of conflicting, contradictory evidence, as a historian, that makes me uneasy at drawing easy conclusions, simple conclusions about how we're surging ahead or either retreating furiously.
Yeah. Well, I asked that because it's so easy to get caught up in this narrative of we're going to hell in a handbasket. And I know everyone's tired of hearing this is the most important election of our lives and our democracy is at stake, even though it does seem to be true, right? I don't want to be an alarmist, and I don't want to be saying the same tired rhetoric, which doesn't seem to be penetrating. I got to say, I'm very concerned about that. But at the same time, it does seem pretty urgent at the moment.
Well, undoubtedly. And I would prefer to stake my reputation upon the recent electoral trends, which have shown decided setbacks for the MAGA movement, particularly since the Dobbs decision overturning women's reproductive freedom. There have been a number of referendums in states as diverse as Kentucky and Kansas, where that was a decisive element against the MAGA movement. Even the state of Florida might be in play as a result of the fact that on the ballot in November will be a constitutional amendment restoring Roe versus Wade, and also, by the way, reducing criminal penalties for smoking marijuana. And supposedly that will drive anti-MAGA forces to the ballot box and therefore will cause Mr. Trump and his movement to spend more in the state of Florida, which means they'll have less correspondingly to spend in Nevada or Arizona.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's certainly spending plenty on his legal defense. That is some of that money. A lot of that money is coming out of campaign coffers, PACs that would be, buying campaign ads for him, right? If it wasn't for his multiple indictments.
Well, that is true, but there's also the other side of the ledger. You saw what happened when there was the initial public offering, the IPO for Truth Social, his challenger to Facebook. On paper, at least, that increased Mr. Trump's net worth by a few billion. There have been reports that he's been on the phone to Mohammed bin Salman, the de facto leader of Saudi Arabia, who already has gifted about $2 billion to his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to play with. There's a fundraiser taking place this week in Palm Beach, where he's expected to raise $33 million, which tops the $25 billion that Mr. Biden and Obama and Clinton raised just a few days ago at Radio City Music Hall in Manhattan. So on the one hand, there's a lot of money going out the door, but on the other hand, there's a lot of money coming in the door.
We're talking with Dr. Gerald Horne. You're welcome to call or jump in the chat and ask a question there. 800-920-1580, chatting on YouTube, KBLA 1580. I'm Dominique DiPrima for Unapologetically Progressive, KBLA Talk 1580.
A safe place to go loud. A great place for progressive politics. KBLA Talk 1580.
Thanks for joining us on a Thursday. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A new bill in California aims to give employees more work-life balance by restricting employers' ability to contact them during off hours. The proposed bill would mandate companies to better specify employee-compensated hours and prohibit them from expecting employees to respond to calls, texts, or emails outside of that time frame. If passed, California would be the first state in America to introduce this kind of legislation. The National Civil Rights Museum is set to host an annual remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. today. The event will be held at the Lorraine Motel site in Memphis, Tennessee, where he was assassinated in 1968. This year is the 56th anniversary of the death of the African-American civil rights leader. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
After a breakout 2023 season, Bazooka is getting the bobblehead treatment on Saturday, April 13th at 6:10 p.m. against the Padres. First 40,000 fans take home the first ever Bruce Gatterall bobblehead presented by Yamava Resort and Casino. Visit Dodgers.com/promotion.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Lakers capped a 5-1 Eastern road trip with a 5-point win at Washington. Anthony Davis had 35 points and 18 rebounds. LeBron dropped 25 with 9 assists. The Lakers are 8-1 in their last 9 games, but they haven't been able to move out of the 9th spot in the Western Conference. The teams ahead of them, Dallas, Phoenix, and Sacramento, keep winning as well. With 5 games left in the regular season, moving up from the 9th spot is important. If the Lakers are 9th at the end of the season, they will have to win 2 games in the play-in round to make the playoffs. The Clippers are back in action tonight at Crypto.com. They play the Denver Nuggets. Tip-off at 7 on TNT. Kawhi Leonard's status for tonight's game is uncertain. He's got a sore right knee. Big props to Angels' new manager, Ryan Washington. The Angels have won 4 straight after sweeping Miami. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
Climate justice, climate equity, climate resilience. By any other name, we demand environmental justice in 2024 and beyond. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we don't black down.
If your Medi-Cal is ending, Cover California is here to help. Cover California is a service from the state that helps you get affordable health insurance. In many cases, at no cost to you, just like with Medi-Cal. We have quality health plans, and we'll help you every step of the way to get the one that works for you and your family. So, if you're no longer eligible for Medi-Cal, check out Cover California. We'll keep you covered. Learn more at coveredca.com.
Yeah, y'all, come on.
At KBLA Talk 1580, We fight the power every day.
Yeah, gotta give us what we want. Gotta give us what we need. Hey!
I listen to KBLA and I love the commercials. I know what the commercials mean. I also, if I'm looking and trying to figure something out, I need something to talk to me that might hit me. And it happens on TV because, you know, every time they show a sporting event, they got the pharmaceutical companies back to back to back telling people how to fix the sickness on the same stuff that they sell them. So we get it.
Yep, we get it too, Chuck D. And that's why at KBLA Talk 1580, we don't black down.
Drop it! Our freedom of speech is freedom of death. We got to fight the powers that be. Fight the power! Fight the power!
Girl, I have a secret. When I get stressed out, I get sweaty. That's why I use Secret Clinical Antiperspirant. It's like my own secret weapon. For 72 hours, I get Secret's strongest protection against sweat caused by stress, heat, and activity, because you know how crazy life can get. Plus, it's made with advanced odor fighters that don't just cover up smelliness. They help prevent it from happening in the first place. Believe me, if I weren't wearing Secret, I'd be a hot, smelly mess. Thankfully, Secret works.
Some days I cover up because of my moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. Now I'm hitting the road with clearer skin thanks to Skyrizi, Risankizumab Riza, a prescription-only 150 milligram injection for adults who are candidates for systemic or phototherapy. With Skyrizi, 3 out of 4 people achieved 90% clearer skin at 4 months. And Skyrizi is just 4 doses a year after 2 starter doses.
Don't use if allergic to Skyrizi. Serious allergic reactions and an increased risk of infections or a lower ability to fight them may occur. Before treatment, your doctor should check for infection and tuberculosis. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms such as fever, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, or if you plan to or recently received a vaccine.
Thanks to Skyrizi, there's nothing on my skin, and that means everything. Ask your doctor today about Skyrizi, the #1 dermatologist prescribed biologic in psoriasis, and visit skyrizi.com or call 1-866-SKY-RIZZI to learn more.
This is KBLA Talk 1580, where hate loses and love wins.
And we're talking to the ever popular Dr. Gerald Horne. If you want to see him lecture, well, you can go on YouTube, and he's all over there. And you can also check our podcast, KBLA 1580, lots of episodes with the amazing Dr. Gerald Horne, or you can call us right now, 800-920-1580. Dr. Horne, if you were, you know, of course, it's the angelversary of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I'm constantly finding myself on these panels and shows, especially when I was on Fox Soul TV, arguing with conservatives who cite Dr. King and try to use that to shut me up. If you were faced with a conservative who was using that strategy and trying to uplift a revisionist version of Dr. King, what's one fact or thought or concept associated with MLK that you would throw in their face?
Well, it's very difficult to debate and argue with demagogues, quite frankly.
True that.
You know, the words are flying back and forth at a mile a minute, and the time is limited. Having said that, of course, we know that Dr. King was a fan of affirmative action, for example, which obviously meant taking race into account. Even LBJ, at his famous Howard University speech in 1965, talked about affirmative action. That is to say, talking about a race where one runner has weights around his or her ankles and the other does not. So, once again, I would not say do not engage in these debates, but certainly recognize the limitations of these debates.
No, understood. I was really kind of searching for a nugget of the radical King that, you know, because I think even if you're not in debate, sometimes the talking points become so potent that black people start repeating them and believing them on their own. Well, Dr. King, you know, believed in a colorblind society, so he would have never supported this. And, you know, I think that your point about affirmative action is probably one of many that were people more familiar with the radical King, they wouldn't repeat those talking points.
Well, look, we were talking a moment or two ago about this bizarro world where we are being scapegoated for all manner of things, for ships hitting bridges and causing the bridges to collapse, for Boeing airplanes having doors fly out into the sky at 30,000 feet. And so in a world like that, it's obviously difficult to put forward a rational argument.
Yeah, that's a great point. Let's go to Dwight calling us from the city of Compton. Hi, Dwight. You're on with Dr. Gerald Horne.
Good morning, Dominique. Good morning, Dr. Horne. I want to thank everyone there at KBLA for the great information you give us. And Dominique, you are so right how they hijack something that we have created or something that we fighting for, like Dr. Horne said, affirmative action, voting rights, and turn it completely around and use gerrymandering in affirmative action in our schools and job hiring. And it's so obvious, even immigration. Donald Trump is married to an immigrant. His mother was an immigrant. His grandfather was an immigrant. His children are half immigrants. We have immigrants in the Congress. But they are so close to this racism till they can't even see their own white supremacy racism. It's like when you're in the bathroom, you don't really smell it till you leave and come out. So the Republicans are too close to white supremacy racism that they can't even see how it's so corrupt. And so the last first lady was an immigrant.
Okay, do you have a question for Dr. Horne, Dwight?
I like to thank you for all the information you've given us, and you are so right how they just hijacked Dr. King's movement and turn it completely around and brainwash the people into saying it's something completely else. But Dr. Horne, thank you for your great information. Dominique, thank you for everything you do, and I love KBLA. Thank you, Dominique.
And we love you back. Do you have any response to Dwight's rant, Dr. Horne?
Well, just briefly, I think that the conclusion we should draw is that whether or not an argument will gain traction, an argument in favor of affirmative action or an argument against affirmative action, it oftentimes just depends upon the politics and the kinds of forces we can mobilize in the political battlefield. And right now, it seems that the right wing, at least in the United States and to a certain extent in Europe as well, are on the march. And so therefore, these irrational arguments are gaining traction. And so we need to turn the situation around politically, and then our arguments, too, will gain traction.
Well said. We've got Molly Bell on the phone from the city of Compton. Molly Bell, you're on with Dr. Gerald Horne. Welcome.
Reparations in memory of our ancestors. God bless morning, Dr. Horne. You know, I love you and follow you and buy your books. It take a long time to read them because each one is like an encyclopedia to me, but, you know, it is what it is. My question to you, Dr. Horne, is that today, from my understanding, Netanyahu and Biden are supposed to speak to each other. Now, I know that we, the United States, we're allies with Israel. So can one ally tell another ally what he must do for his country? I put earlier in the chat room that I grew up in Compton, and we were just designated Crips and Bloods. Even if I didn't agree with what they were doing, that's what it was. So I'm asking you, what do you think they will talk about, and can Biden change Netanyahu's mind? I'll listen to your comment off the air. Love you, Dr. Horne. All you prayer warriors out there, you know what you've got to do. You've got to keep fasting. You've got to keep praying because the struggle continues. And always, to God be the glory. Thank you, Dominique.
Thank you, Molly Bell. Dr. Horne?
Well, Netanyahu has an advantage with the Israeli lobby, which is quite influential in both the Democratic and Republican parties. Mr. Biden, I'm sure, will raise the point of this Israeli so-called accidental attack on this food convoy led by Jose Andres, the well-known Spanish chef. But I'm not sure if Mr. Biden's plan to get his allies in Israel to force new elections by September, leading to the exit from center stage of Mr. Netanyahu, will actually work. Work in terms of slowing down this genocide that's unfolding in Gaza, because the man next up at bat, speaking of Benny Gantz, who visited Washington just a few days ago, he is basically Mr. Netanyahu without the duplicity. it's not necessarily going to involve a change in fundamental policy.
I mean, isn't he like arguably even further to the right than Netanyahu?
Well, clearly, that's what I mean. I
Yeah.
think that it's a kind of cosmetic change. It's meant to suggest that the ship of state in Israel is going in a different direction, but it will not be heading in a different direction. And I think it'll probably throw the movement off balance, at least for a few days.
And that the attack on the food convoy, which, Netanyahu is saying it was an accident, but he's also saying, oh, well, that's what happens in war. Because you have, people from the UK, Canada, US, Australia that were killed in that attack, and it seems to be getting a lot of conversation. Do you think that adds to the pressure? Could that be somewhat of a turning point? I mean, to Molly Bell's question, we give them tons of money. We are funding this war. On the day that convoy was attacked, we authorized more bombs for them. So how do we not have more leverage, Dr. Gerald Horne? I mean, we are their sugar daddies.
Well, that's for sure. But once again, we come back to the Israeli lobby. As we speak, they're gearing up to defeat a number of members of the Congressional Black Caucus who call for a ceasefire.
Right.
First on their hit list is Congressman Jamal Bowman of Bronx Westchester, who has been repudiated by a number of leading black figures in New York City, including former Governor David Patterson, for example. According to recent polls, Jamal is about 17 points behind in the Democratic Party primary. And so given that sort of muscular flexing by the Israeli lobby, it makes it very difficult for the political leaders to speak out because they want to keep their jobs.
Yeah. It's 800-920-1580 is the number. Tom from Irvine, you're on with Dr. Gerald Horne.
Good morning, Dominique. Good morning, Dr. Horne. I am cautiously optimistic about this year. I think that we are at the beginning of a new cycle of 80-year cycles. If you look back in American history, 80 years ago would have been 1944, right in the middle of the World War II, and we were approaching victory there. And then 80 years before that was the Civil War, 1864, and we were approaching victory at that time. Lincoln and Roosevelt both died almost 80 years to the day apart. And then 80 years before that was the American Revolution, and we eventually won that. And all of those instances, we suffered early defeats to the right wing, and then we eventually overcame them, and the moderate and progressive forces triumphed. So, and I get this from the book, The Fourth Turning, and I was wondering Dr. Horne's opinion about that.
Thanks, Tom.
The book.
Well,
go ahead, Dr. Horne.
Well, I'm not familiar with the book. I hope that the caller is correct, that we're about to turn the corner. But I'm sure the caller would agree we should not necessarily rely unduly on the invisible hand of history to guide us forward in terms of these 80-year cycles. It's going to take major mobilization, major organizing, going door to door, mobilizing unions, mobilizing church folk, religious folk. So it's going to be a heavy lift, no doubt.
Continuing our conversation with Dr. Gerald Horne, you're welcome in 800-920-1580. You're listening to KBLA Talk 1580.
More of First Things First with Dominique DiPrima when we come forward.
We asked seniors how to prevent Medicare scams.
My best advice, if you get a phone call, do not talk to the person. These people are well-trained. Don't talk to them.
They don't know me. They're just trying to scam me.
Don't be fooled. Hang up. Just hang up.
Never give out your Medicare number.
They're going to get your number to put in a false claim.
If I get a call from someone, I don't pick up the phone. And should I pick up the phone and they ask for information, then I hang up.
How do you detect Medicare fraud?
Just like I check my credit card statements, I check my Medicare statements monthly.
Scammers can get a hold of your number, order medical devices through your account, and you're not even going to know about it if you don't look at your statement.
Check your statement every month. If you get your statement and you see something that you know you did not have done, you report it.
Call your senior Medicare Patrol.
To report Medicare fraud, call the Senior Medicare Patrol at 855-613-7080.
Tips to help improve your credit score in 2024. Establishing credit is an important key to achieving financial health, but building a credit history from scratch can feel challenging since you need credit to build credit. First, what does it mean to build credit? All consumers have a score between 300 and 850. You want your score to be as high as possible as lenders look at your credit score to make loan and credit decisions. A good credit score shows you have a track record of borrowing money responsibly. Remember, it's never too late to build or rebuild your credit. This segment is sponsored by JP Morgan Chase & Company.
The possibility of lung cancer can be pretty scary, especially if you're one of approximately 8 million current or former smokers at high risk. That's why SaveByTheScan.org wants you to know that now there's a breakthrough low-dose CT scan that can detect lung cancer early, and it only takes 60 seconds. You stop smoking, now start screening. For an easy quiz to see if you're eligible, visit SaveByTheScan.org. It could save your life. SaveByTheScan.org is brought to you by the American Lung Association's Lung Force Initiative and the Ad Council.
Your ancestors' favorite radio station, and your favorite morning show host. Let's get back to Dominique DiPrima right now.
Right now, Dr. Gerald Horne is our guest. 800-920-1580 is the number. Let's see. Paul Lee in the chat is asking Dr. Horne a great question about Project 2025. Have you analyzed it, and what are your thoughts?
Well, this is the so-called blueprint for the purported incoming Trump administration in January 2025. Mr. Trump is not necessarily going to rely upon the amateurs and that he relied on in 2017. High on the agenda will be mass deportations. It's estimated that 10 million people will be deported. That if California does not necessarily want to comply, that the National Guard from Texas will be sent into California pursuant to the Insurrection Act. Lawyers are already gearing up for this. It's a very draconian program that's outlined, and it's just sent a chill down the spine of all of us.
Some of those things don't really seem possible. I don't know how you really deport 10 million people. That's expensive. It's also not really in the best interest of a lot of corporates who rely on that, workforce, frankly. And whether you think it's a good idea or you don't, it seems highly unlikely to happen. Others do seem very likely, like the kneecapping of our regulatory agencies, for example.
Well, sure. I think it's going to be very difficult to deport 10 million people. It may not be as difficult to round them up and put them in camps, which sounds very ominous and blood-curdling. And certainly, as you suggest, the regulatory agencies are in for a real bludgeoning. You saw what happened at the Supreme Court just last week with the attempt to prevent the Food and Drug Administration from legalizing the so-called abortion pill. In other words, trying to extend the import of the Dobbs decision from a year or so ago. Of course, I don't expect that kneecapping, as you put it, of the FDA to prevail in the high court, but that gives you a foretaste of what's to come.
Yeah, I mean, if you take away the ability of the Environmental Protection Agency to protect the environment, and even though you claim to be for states' rights, undermine California, for example, agency in creating their own standards for emissions and that kind of thing, those effects are could potentially be pretty devastating. They're talking about eliminating the Department of Education altogether. All of the jobs that come with that, many of those are jobs that are held by black people. And that's why I've said over the years that, public sector worker is another one of the new euphemisms for N-word, like DEI, CRT, and woke.
Well, certainly black people in this country are disproportionately hired by the government as opposed to the public sector. Disproportionately employees in the post office, the city of Los Angeles workforce, the federal bureaucracy, et cetera. And that's precisely the force that's in the crosshairs. And so I don't think that's an accident. I don't think that that's a coincidence, because we also know, it barely bears repeating, that black people are high on the target list for the far right and the MAGA movement.
The phone lines are still open, 800-920-1580, 800-920-1580. Someone else in the chat, I can't see because it's scrolled up, wants to know if you think that, or saying that someone should ask Trump if he plans to reinstitute his Muslim ban. And I think he's made that pretty clear.
Oh, clearly. As a matter of fact, he's been ramping up the rhetoric. As a matter of fact, I hate to give out Trump propaganda, but I do feel the need to apprise your audience that he's been talking lately about a bloodbath. He has a new website called Biden Bloodbath. This adoption of the word bloodbath, once again, is quite chilling. Violence is part of the bag of tricks of the Trump movement. Recall at his rallies where he encourages violence against those who are protesting against his message. So this is a very ominous moment, I'm afraid to say, and let us hope and organize to make sure that Mr. Trump's wildest dreams do not become our nightmare.
Forensic accountant says that they plan to stay home on Election Day. If I'm reading that right, it looks like it's part of a two-part that I can't see the first part of. And I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about black people in particular staying home, or the rise of this anti-immigrant rhetoric in our community as some kind of solution to anti-blackness, African-American unemployment, even reparations. Folks saying that money that we're spending on immigration could be used to pay for reparations. I'm concerned about those talking points and those thoughts making inroads and pushing people either to stay home or to vote for Trump.
Well, there's been a lot of newspaper coverage, as I'm sure you know, about a supposed defection of black folk to the Trump team. I'm not so sure about that, but certainly we have to realize that we are not unaffected by this anti-immigrant rhetoric. But at the same time, it's easy, it seems to me, to push back against it. Take the reparations question. If there's going to be reparations, it's going to involve global pressure from Mexico, for example, pressure in this hemisphere. And how are we going to generate that global pressure when we're campaigning simultaneously against Mexican immigrants? That makes no sense.
Well, I mean, we'll do another show on another day, but I feel like I'm starting to see that make inroads. It's not logical, but some things just grip people's imagination, whether they're logical or not. You said during News, Traffic, and Sports that you wanted to share some good news regarding Angola.
Well, yes, it's similar to the last good news I shared with regard to Zimbabwe. And of course, every cloud has a silver lining. What I mean is there's a downturn in relations between the United States and the continent's giant, speaking of South Africa, not least because South Africa brought the case before the International Court of Justice against U.S. ally Israel. And as a result, Congress is lined up to punish South Africa with regard to certain trade exemptions. And so in order to gain leverage against South Africa, the United States is trying to improve relations with the neighbors of South Africa. That includes Zimbabwe, as I noted, but it also includes Angola, which is doing a deft job of playing the United States off against China and getting goodies from both. And given the fact that we know that a substantial percentage of the Black American community has roots in Angola per the African slave trade. And of course, we all also know about Angola State Prison in Louisiana, which bespeaks that latter point. I think that in certain sense, Angola is sitting in the catbird seat and has a foreign policy that other African nations and perhaps even Black Americans should try to emulate.
All right, I have to ask you this because you're sitting in Texas. There's been a lot of brouhaha about Beyonce putting out a country album. A lot of Black people actually complaining about it. I've been happy to see her elevating and amplifying some existing Black country artists and their sales jumping. You have any thoughts on this?
Well, if you listen to that album, there is a strain of, quote, country, unquote, but there are other strains as well. That's point number one. Point number two, as she points out, country music, so-called, has deep roots in the Black community. Point number three is that this marriage of Black people and country is nothing new. Look at Darius Rucker, look at Charlie Pride, for example. So all in all, I think that if you're going to complain about that album, you should take other routes.
Dr. Gerald Horne, we got 30 seconds. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, once again, follow Angola, because what it's doing is a model for the rest of Africa. And speaking of the rest of Africa, let us also salute the voters in Senegal. 3 weeks ago, the president and prime minister were in prison. They won the election just a few days ago and are now ruling the country. That's the kind of turnabout we need to emulate.
And they elected the youngest president in all of Africa, if I'm not mistaken.
44 years old, which puts many of us to shame.
Indeed, it does. Dr. Gerald Horne, thank you so much.
Thank you.
A day full of blockbusters and heavy hitters. Poet, activist Luis Rodriguez is next on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
Thanks for joining us on a Thursday. I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. A new bill in California aims to give